Hey folks, good morning and happy Friday. Welcome to your January 17th edition of Forecasting Space with me, your host, Chase Wilson. Sorry about the lack of a show last week. Of course, as a meteorologist first, we were focused on that really active wintry pattern that we had here locally in the Tennessee Valley, but thankfully we're calming down a little bit, at least for the next couple of days. So let's take a look at what we can expect here first, of course, as usual, for launches from the continental United States for the next 7 days. First things first, over at Vandenberg Space Force Base on the West Coast, it's a Starlink launch. You probably aren't surprised to hear that. Group 11-8 launching there at 9:57 a.m. Central Time, so actually relatively early there on the West Coast, but that's actually the only launch we're going to be getting for the weekend. The next launch after that's another Starlink launch. That's going to be Group 13-1 at 11:13 p.m. on Monday, January 20th, Inauguration Day, if you will, is one way to look at it. Then after that, we do have another launch on Wednesday. That's going to be at 8:38 a.m. Again, Starlink, Group 11-6. So we're actually starting to see a very consistent pattern, right? As we've headed over the last couple of years, we've seen just huge cadence from Starlink, so that's no surprise. We also have Starlink Group 10-12 launching out of Cape Canaveral there on January 24th. That's actually 1 week from today, in fact, so we'll watch that. That's going to be at 4:45 p.m. Again, that's going to be on Cape Canaveral. Starlink Group 11-6, by the way, the one on Wednesday, that's going to be on the West Coast. And besides the one that we're seeing tomorrow, the others will be on Cape Canaveral Space Force Station there on the East Coast, so we'll watch that. But besides that, it's not another couple of weeks before we see another launch out of the continental United States. But I'll tell you what, it has been an active couple of days here with Starship and Blue Origin. Let's talk about that because I think the industry is starting to shake up just a little bit. Perhaps the biggest thing of note lately, an inaugural launch. Blue Origin's New Glenn rocket has finally launched for the first time, and it was a pretty smash hit, right? Looks like it was pretty much successful. Now, I say pretty much because the main mission, that is to say getting to orbit, which is the goal of any rocket, was a success, right? The second stage with its two BE-3U engines boosted off just fine into medium Earth orbit, and it's doing great out there. But the first stage, well, it didn't do so well. Now, in years past, that's fine because rockets have been disposable, right? This first stage, but this is actually going to be reusable. And unfortunately, it does not look like it kind of hit the mark, so to speak. It looks like it had some issues on re-entry. We lost the booster there, so that part of it wasn't a success, but that's not necessary for mission success as a whole. As long as the payload, the Blue Ring orbiter, can get into space, get into orbit, and get to its target, it's a success. And that was really the parameters, if you will, that Blue Origin set for success. So we're doing great here, and it's fantastic that this thing finally launched, because if you're a Huntsville resident like myself, you've heard for years and years rocket tests, right? And of recently, it's been the BE-4s, the core engines of this rocket. So it's been a long time coming. We're very, very proud of our friends over at Blue Origin. A lot of residents in Huntsville work for Blue Origin, that giant rocket factory. So needless to say, it's great to see a new member of the orbital space rocket launch family. You're finally coming on in Methalox too. This is one of the first Methalox rockets to reach orbit. Vulcan ULA's rocket, also based there out of Huntsville, actually in Decatur, also recently made orbit. So we're starting to see this new era of space finally creep on in. And of course with Starship, which also continues its test campaign, Flight 7 and stuff like that. That's fantastic too. So this is just great. I love how 2025 is starting so far. And of course, Jared Isaacman is about to become the administrator pending the hearing. So I think he'll be pretty good. You know, I don't want to get too opinionated, but I do think he has some promise as the next head of NASA. So I think this is going to really be a pivotal point this year, that is, for space travel. I'm really, really excited, especially with these new updates. We got some good stuff to look forward to. I'm pretty eager for this. Coming up tonight and tomorrow night, we have a planetary alignment as well. This little bit of a planetary parade, if you will be 6 planets lining up in the night sky. So if conditions are favorable, if you have those clearer skies, Mars, Jupiter, Neptune, Saturn, Uranus, and Venus will all appear in a row. Although Neptune and Uranus will only be visible with binoculars or a telescope, that's still a solid 4 planets you can see with the naked eye aligned there. And the 7 planets will actually align in another configuration on the 28th of February, but that actually won't occur again until the year 2492. So unless you want to wait 500 some odd years, get out there if you can. Now, of course, go check out Tennessee Valley Weather's forecast, right? Because I don't know the pattern is going to be too great over the next couple of nights, but if you're out and about, maybe you're a few miles out for a weekend trip, you might have a good opportunity there. Now, the best time to see this, by the way, is during the first couple of hours after the sun goes down, with Saturn and Venus being very close to each other to the southwest, and Jupiter will be high overhead, and Mars will be off to the east, and you can actually continue that out with binoculars or a telescope and see Uranus and Neptune. And by the way, Mars will be reaching opposition, so it will be the brightest it will be for the next couple of years. That means it's closest to Earth. So we actually have a pretty nice treat here coming up over the next month or two. And again, February 28th, we see that other alignment. And like I said, that's not due again for another 500 some odd years. So be sure to get out there if you can, because this is one of those things you don't want to miss if you can. Well, I'd say that just about concludes this episode of Forecasting Space. It's been very interesting over the last weeks, what with Starship, New Glenn, everything like that. I'll tell you what, one of these days, I need to make it out there for a launch. But hey, if you're on a weekend trip down to Daytona, down at the Cape, watch this, see if you can catch any of those launches, send in your photos, and I'll talk to you next week.